Good morning, everyone. We're up to Parak Hey, Mishna Hey. Sa'ah Truma Shnafalameya, a Sa'ah Truma that fell into 100 times more, 100 Sa'ah, Higbiya. He lifted it up, because as we say, when the Truma becomes nullified 100 times more, you still have to take out the original amount and give to the Kohen to replace what was lost, what was nullified. So he lifted up the Sa'ah that was supposed to go to the Kohen, but and then it fell into a different pile. So we have a story. This is the story. A Sa'ah of Truma fell into 100 times more of Chulin. It became nullified. He lifted out a Sa'ah to give to the Kohen, and then it fell into a pile of Chulin. So Rebbe Lezer says, B'damas k'truma vadai, it has the power to create meduma, like something that is something that is certain truma. According to Belezer, following his opinion from before, the sa'ah that we take out from the nullified truma and chulin is treated like the original sa'ah of truma. And if it's completed, and the Rebbe Lezer takes that so far as to say that if it's considered like the original sa'ah of truma, that means we consider it all truma. And if it's going to fall into chulin, you're going to need 100 times more than that sa'ah. Meaning that sa'ah that was taken out from the pile where it was nullified is considered completely like the original truma. It is the entire sa'ah is considered truma, and therefore it will accordingly make meduma. If it falls into something else, if you have 100 times of more than it, it will nullify it again. If you have less, it will not nullify it. It will now create a whole new meduma, a whole new pile of grain that is a suffix truma and suffix chulin. That's Relez's opinion. The Chachamim say, it only creates meduma according to the proportion of truma that's in it. Meaning, according to the Chachamim say that when you lift up this, when you take out to compensate the Kohen, and we do treat it like truma, we don't treat it really exactly like truma, meaning to consider the entire replacements truma. Actually, we consider it a mixture. And it's a mixture of chulin and truma based on the proportion that it came from. Now, the proportion that it came from had, and remember the case was the sa'ah fell into 100 times more. So until now, you had the mixture, again, was 100 chulin and one sa'ah of truma that became batal, right? You have a total of 101. So now when I take out a sa'ah, replacement sa'ah for the Kohen, the same proportion is followed. I look at this sa'ah of truma following the same proportion. I have in it 100 parts chulin to 1 part truma, just like the pile that it came from. Now, you may wonder and say, well, if in this replacement truma, I have 100 times chulin against I have 100 parts chulin against 1 part truma, that's enough to be mevatel. That's enough to nullify. Well, that's the whole point that we say here. The Chachamim said, no, we don't apply, but by the replacement truma, we don't do that. By that which we use to replace the Kohen, the truma that became originally nullified, we don't go ahead and say, we don't look at it all as truma, but we don't say either that the chulin part can nullify the truma part. So I'm still left with a mixture. Now, at the same time, okay, therefore we say that if it's going to make something meduma, it's going to go according to that proportion. According to the proportion of truma that's in the sa'ah, that is going to determine whether it's meduma or not. So if I'm starting off with this sa'ah, 100 parts of it are chulin. 1 part of it is truma. Now it falls into another pile. Okay, so we say that I'm going to need 100 times more, not 100 times more of the whole sa'ah, but 100 times more of the proportion of this sa'ah, which is truma, which comes out being, if I have 100 against 1, it's one part of 101. And I need 100 times more in the new pile of chulin to be mevatel, to nullify just that part. Now, another point that's brought out by the Rambam is that So let's say if we, according to the Chacham say, I really have a mixture here. Part of it is chulin, part of it is truma. And I'm going to need 100 times more chulin to go ahead and nullify that truma. So let's say the chulin that I fell in was less than 100 times more. But if I combine that chulin with the chulin portion of the original of this replacement saw that fell into this new pile, I'll have 100 times more. Meaning, can I use the chulin part of this replacement sa'ah to combine it with the chulin that fell into to nullify the portion of truma that's in the replacement sa'ah? Because again, according to the Chachamim, what we have here is the replacement sa'ah is a mixture. Part of it is truma, part of it is chulin. And the nullification only has to be in proportion to the truma portion of the replacement sa'ah that fell in. So the Rambam said, and so the question is, can the part of the sa'ah that fell in, which is chulin, combine with the chulin that it fell into? And the Rambam says, no, it can't. Although the Chachamim did not say that we look at this replacement sa'ah as completely truma, to say I need 100 times more than the entire sa'ah, but number one, within this replacement sa'ah itself, the 100 times more of chulin to the truma is not going to nullify it, and the chulin part of this sa'ah cannot be used to nullify the other truma part of that sa'ah. It cannot combine with the other chulin that it fell into to nullify the truma portion of the sa'ah, of the replacement sa'ah that fell in. Now, a very interesting thing that you bring here from the Yad Avram is the following: that our case is where it says the sa'ah truma fell into 100, you lifted it up, meaning you took out the replacement one, and that replacement one now fell into a different pile of chulin. What if that's not what happened? Okay, what if the case was where if you took, let's say, part of this mixture, right? You had a sa'ah that fell into 100 times more. Now, let's say the case was not that I separated a replacement sa'ah and it fell in. Let's say before I separated anything, part of this pile fell into chulin. Okay? Before I separated the sa'ah, before I separated the replacement sa'ah, and I have 101 sa'ah, 100 chulin, one sa'ah that used to be truma that became nullified, and now from this pile, it fell into another pile. Mishna doesn't talk about that. How come? So there's two opinions here. One opinion is that since the truma was nullified in the mixture, produce from the mixture is fully regarded as chulin, and therefore does not impact upon other chulin into which it falls. Meaning, if you didn't separate the replacement sa'ah for the kohen, I don't have any truma here anymore. It was all nullified. I only consider truma once I go ahead and I separate the sa'ah. I separate the sa'ah's replacement truma. That gets a certain status. That's going to get a status of truma. And the question is, how much of it is truma? But until you separate that replacement sa'ah, it's all chulin, because the original sa'ah truma that fell in was nullified. So it's all chulin. If it's all chulin, it's not going to affect anything that it falls into. That's the opinion of the Tosfos Anshe Shem. But the Mishnah Rishonah suggests that the sages concede to Relezer that prior to a sa'ah being removed to be given to a kohen, produce from the mixture causes other produce into which it falls to become medumah, as if it were definite truma. Okay, this is the opposite extreme. According to the Mishnah Rishonah, if before you separate the sa'ah of truma, part of this falls into another mixture, that entire amount that fell in is considered truma, even according to the Chachamim who argue with Relezer. In the case where you separated the truma, you already took out the sa'ah to replace the sa'ah to compensate the kohen. Before you separate it, they would agree that whatever comes out is considered completely like truma. They do not regard the contents of the mixture as nullified until a sa'ah has been removed to be given to a kohen. That's how far they're going, according to the Mishnah Rishonah. That actually, they don't consider the bittul, they don't consider the nullification actually taking place until you separate the replacement sa'ah. So even though, according to the letter of the law, the sa'ah of truma falls in, it becomes nullified 100 times more, according to this argument, the Chachamim did not basically allow us to consider the nullification taking place until you actually have separated the replacement stuff for the Kohen. They adopted this stringency in order to compel people to remove us to give to a Kohen. It's a good argument. They wanted to make sure, look, we know that this whole Meduma business is this whole Meduma halacha is something that, as we mentioned before, people didn't necessarily take that serious or serious enough. And therefore, if we consider it all nullified, even before you replace it, so then people are going to say, okay, it's nullified, it's chulin, they're not going to bother with it. But if you tell me that before I separate it, I can't use it yet, it's still meduma, I don't allow nullification to, so to speak, the Bachamim don't allow the nullification to be considered until you actually separate the compensation for the Kohen, people are for sure going to do it. So very interesting argument here. And in the situation where before you actually separate the Sa'av Truma, do we say, well, it's nullified, and if it's nullified, were it to fall into more chulin, it's just chulin and chulin, or do we say the contrary? Do we say that until you actually separate the replacement Sa'ah, we consider the whole thing as still meduma, still a mixture, and until then, it's considered a mixture. Not only is it's considered a mixture. And not only consider it a mixture, we'll actually say that if this falls in from this pile to another pile, we'll consider the whole thing truma. All this is all part of making sure that people that after the mixture happened and halachically the bit should take place, that people should take this serious and make sure to compensate the Kohen. And therefore, we consider as if the bittul didn't take place. And we consider what fell in as if it's the whole, if we consider that thing that came out as if it was the truma that fell in, and you can need 100 times more of it to nullify it. Okay. Next mitzvah, prohibition against being intimate with your wife's sister during her lifetime. That's very important. During her lifetime, one is allowed to marry his wife's sister after she passes away. If she's alive, even he divorced her, the sister is forbidden. But once the wife passes away, the sister is permissible. Shneimar. The pasuk says, and a woman with her sister did not take as a rival to be intimate with her during her lifetime. Once he has performed kedushin, the first step of marriage on the woman, becomes forbidden to her sister, whether this is your wife's sister because they share the same father or just the same mother, and even if this was her sister that was born out of wedlock to one of her parents. And if, let's say, he is intimate with his wife's sister while his wife is still alive, even if he divorced his wife, the punishment would be divine severance of one's life. There is no capital punishment for this, even if it's done with witnesses and warning. If it was done unintentionally, it would carry a sin offering. This applies in all places and at all times. Have a wonderful day.